featuring the people who make York special.
It's the warmness and it's the humour. The people who make it.
The people who work in the factory are very, very proud of the fact that this is the home of Kit Kat.
And the organisations doing amazing things.
A fair number of women say that Kira has saved their lives, so we know we make a big difference.
From tourism and history to business, charity and the arts.
We are as equally important in the history of this country as London is and as Oxford is.
I love the idea that York becomes the UK's alternative to London.
This is Between These Walls, a podcast for York with Sophie Hudson. This episode contains detailed discussion of childhood cancer and the loss of a child, so some listeners may find it upsetting. This is the story of a little boy from York. Jamie Inglis passed away in 2013 after a brave battle against a rare form of childhood cancer called neuroblastoma. His legacy lives on in his mum's work. Vicky now works with a charity called Solving Kids Cancer to support other families facing diagnosis. This is part 2 of Jamie's story. After pioneering treatment in America, which the family had to fundraise for, Jamie was finally able to start school and get back to normality. But after 18 months in remission, they received the devastating news that Jamie had relapsed and needed more treatment. We pick up the story with Vicky at the point where Jamie was about to receive a stem cell transplant back in Germany.
So we ended up in Tübingen with Jamie to undergo what's called a haplo stem cell transplant, which means that in frontline treatment, the children have their stem cells harvested and then they're frozen and given back to the children in their frontline when they have high-dose chemotherapy, in the hope that those stem cells, will rejuvenate, because that's where neuroblastoma, the early beginnings of it, are there. So the haplo stem cell is similar in that sense, but the stem cells were to come from parent donor. So both John and I had to undergo, blood tests to see which parent would be the donor, and have to go through, almost like a dialysis procedure to gather the blood products, and then it filters out. It's amazing what they do. It filters out those stem cells, which are then given back into your child. So John ended up being the best match, really, for Jamie. So Jamie underwent the stem cell transplant, the haplo version, in Tübingen, and things went well. He was doing really well. With that type of treatment, the risks are great. All of the treatment brings huge risk. One of the risks was, that even lowered immune system, also a rejection, graft versus host disease, where potentially, the recipient of those stem cells, their body may start to reject it. So they were looking at those kind of signs as well. And then following that bit, the plan was for Jamie on that protocol to receive more immunotherapy again. So we'd got through the haplo stem cell. He'd got through that really well, remarkably well, actually. And I think in about the end of October of 2012, he had the first round of immunotherapy on that protocol. And it was quite obvious. And I remember calling home and saying to my family, we're not doing any more immunotherapy. There just were so many side effects that Jamie hadn't had before. Not only the breathing problems that started to happen, but his vision had gone really blurry. These are all side effects from immunotherapy, but he hadn't had those when he did immunotherapy because they were slightly different drugs. That first round of immunotherapy, highlighted that there was something going on, and there was something going on in his brain. We thought the real fear was that he'd relapsed in the brain. Anyway, scans came, they did scans didn't really show anything. So they tried to manage his symptoms, on the ward, but he just wasn't improving. Things were getting really, really bad. And he, mentally, there was confusion. He had, so for example, it was Advent. So by this point, we were moving into early December for Advent, and people had been around the wards, delivering Advent calendars. And we put it in front of Jamie so that he could see it, because he was still having a few issues, with his eyesight. And he was also really, really cold, because what we now know was that there was a virus reactivating in his brainstem. So that was affecting, his ability to regulate his own body temperature. He was looking at this Advent calendar and he said, what is this, Mummy? What is it? It's like, Jamie, it's like, he knew what they were. So I explained, well, we're going to open a door each day. We can do that either in the morning or at night time, whatever you want to do. He just had no idea. He was so confused. And then he said, where's Daddy? And I said, well, Daddy's at the parent house. There was a house that we lived in with other parents, a wonderful charity, literally a 10-minute walk away. I said, Daddy's, as he was sort of trying to make sense of that, he had a fit, he had a seizure, and the crash team were there. And again, they needed to do another emergency scan, and they did find then there was some, not disease, but they found that everything was indicating to a virus that was reactivating in the brainstem. So oxygen levels just, dropped, and we went up to intensive care. We spent, the care they gave Jamie was, honestly, this boy, we battled with Jamie probably during that night and the next day to kind of keep him stable before intubating him, because we just wanted to, we didn't want to go down that route immediately, and neither did the team. So it was tough, because every cannula, everything that was going in, Jamie was like, I'm not having that, pulling everything out. When they did finally make the decision the next day or 2 days later that we're going to have to, put him in an induced coma, we'd been there before. That had happened during his frontline treatment, so we knew what to expect. We also knew that Jamie was quite good at pulling those tubes out too, because even at 4 years old, he had pulled out tubes when he was in intensive care and woke himself up. Anyway, of course, the same thing happened. They intubated him, and then, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days or maybe a week later, I can't recall now. Yeah, just during the night when the care team were in, he managed to basically extubate himself. So he was able to pull out the tubes and then start breathing on his own. So the team were like, do you know what? Let's go with this. This is what Jamie wants, and we'll keep him stable, but obviously if things start to get complicated, we will have to put him in another coma. And so I think he had maybe, again, a couple of days where he was not intubated, and he recognized us, he was able to talk to us, so verbally he was, those verbal skills and everything was working in that sense. And they said, oh, we think we can possibly move you down to high dependency, so we can get you out of intensive care back onto the other ward that still had lots of care and attention. We just couldn't believe it. So by this point, it was Christmas Eve. We were like, okay, let's try, because obviously if they needed also the bed for another equally sick child, we were conscious also of all of that as when you're in that environment. So we went with that. We moved Jamie back to the stem cell transplantation unit, which is, really a high level of care, high level of, cleanliness and, all of that. And he lasted in there about half a day and things started to, go a little bit wrong with his breathing again. The breathing, the oxygen levels, the same things were beginning to happen. And he had, another big seizure. And they said he needs to go back. So we ended up then moving Jamie and everything back into the same room that we'd left that morning, which was really disheartening. But I actually, as a parent, felt better that he was there. Christmas Day of 2012, we were with him when they had to, put him back in a coma again. And yeah, and that was it. And, we will always remember, the care that team gave, not just to Jamie, because they did, but to, to John and I as well. And then we had, really difficult conversations the day before he passed away. We had those difficult conversations, with the whole team. But it meant that we knew what was going to happen. We knew it was up to us when life support, was stepped back. So we had a little bit of control in that sense, and it meant that we, Jamie's last day, everybody that had been involved with Jamie in that hospital, the play team, the nurses, we were all able to just be together and spend time, talking with him. And this is a really strange thing to say, but if anybody out there has gone through it, you might understand. But he had a good, he was peaceful. It was a good, what I call a good death. If that's ever having to happen, you want it to be in that way. And it was the best. It couldn't have been, it's an awful thing to happen, but it couldn't have been any better on the same token. So yeah, I mean, when I think back now, it was an awful thing. It is an awful thing to have happened, but we were dealing with something out of our control, and the toxicity of treatment for neuroblastoma, high risk in particular. The treatment is so intense. It's one of the most intensely treated childhood cancers. And so because of that, there's also a higher risk of, complications from having that treatment, which ultimately was what happened with Jamie, because ironically, bless him, he had no evidence of neuroblastoma at the time of his passing. He was still in remission. So, things, sometimes I think, what could have happened, if he hadn't have ended up in intensive care? But, I think the treatment itself is so harsh that you can't predict. You need to have that treatment. You need to go through frontline treatment. You need to have the chemotherapy. You need to have radiation. But of course, that can sometimes come, at another price. So it's a really difficult balancing act. As parents, you just want to treat that disease and get rid of it. But we're not quite there yet in terms of, the treatments, making it kinder. And I don't say that lightly, but what we mean by that is, do all children with high-risk neuroblastoma, do they all have to have all of that treatment that's so toxic? Because at the moment, that kind of one-size-fits-all, is thrown at those children. But for some children, that they may not need all of that.
The boy the British military took to its heart and supported through cancer treatment has lost his fight against the disease. 7-year-old Jamie Inglis passed away in hospital in Germany yesterday. Julie Knox has more details.
His nurses called him Prince Charming. He continued learning, playing and smiling despite his weakening condition. Jamie Inglis passed away as his mummy lay beside him and told him how much he was loved, and his daddy held his hand. On the Facebook page through which the Inglis have kept supporters updated, thousands of people continue to pay tribute to a smiling...
Clearly, we're in a different country, aren't we? And the practicalities then happen of, needing to be repatriated. And we had a local businessman from York that had been supporting, with us sort of flying. I remember there was a point, I think just before he became really ill, we had been able to travel home, not see anybody, but he'd been able to travel home, but we had to travel on, had to pay for like a small private flight so that there was no risk of infection. So the local businessman, Andrew, had seen our kind of plight and had stepped in to help. So at the point of repatriation, we flew home with Jamie. Again, very surreal, isn't it? But again, what an amazing experience to actually just still be with Jamie and fly home. But then we flew into Leeds, Bradford, and from there, before we flew home, we obviously had put things in place because we had the choice. We could have come straight home, but because we'd been living away since that August, we didn't really feel that we wanted to come back. Poppy was still with her grandparents down in Oxfordshire. It just wouldn't have been right. So we were able to go to Martin House Children's Hospice. And I'm so glad that we did. I mean, they enabled us, they cooked. So they cook for the families. We hadn't been eating properly either. So, they were able to cook for us and we didn't have to think about anything like that. But most importantly, we had, a room, a suite to ourselves where we could be with Jamie, which was really important. But also, it enabled friends or family to come and go as they wanted as well before Jamie's service. So we probably spent about 4 days maybe at Martin House, and we were able to do all the things that, like we made a bauble, a Christmas tree decoration, with Jamie's fingerprints, and it gave us that time as well to do those special things that we couldn't really do that in Germany because Jamie was getting ready to be flown home. So that was important for us to have that time, and Martin House were and are incredible. And I just want to give them a shout out because not only did they support us there, but equally, possibly about 6-7 months later, they were able to support Poppy, who, was a bereaved sibling. She was only 3.5, 2 at that point. And so when she went for her kind of play therapy sessions with other children, that also coincided where I could do my bereavement support with other families. And so it was just a wonderful program, and Poppy has amazing memories of what they did for her. They went on a trip, they stayed away overnight on a local farm. So Martin House just are incredible. So I would urge anybody to, really go have a look at their website and their Facebook page. They're always looking for volunteers. They're always looking for people to fundraise for them as well. So, it changes your view on what hospice is like, because they were there for Jamie and Poppy beforehand as well. So the hospice and palliative care team are incredible.
The way that you talk about Jamie, and from what I remember from the story at the time, I mean, this was 11 years ago, wasn't it? We've just passed the 11th anniversary. He strikes me as an incredibly resilient child who just got on with it and was positive and gave you that sort of strength. What do you feel like Jamie taught you in his life?
Oh, that's a great question. I think not to worry about, massive things. Challenges can be overcome. You have to live for the moment.
Yeah. Am I right in saying that he was positive throughout and just got on with it?
Yeah, all the time, except for probably there was one round of chemotherapy in his protocol in Germany that was a particularly hard round. And that was, I think, round 5 or 6 on his regime. And that was probably the only time that, he couldn't cope with it. And, so his behaviour, whilst he was in hospital was really, really challenging as a parent to deal with that. But aside from that, he was really, really positive, really happy. Even when he'd had the surgery, the only thing he complained about was having immediately coming round from surgery. He'd obviously got a drain in his back and he didn't want that in either. But he was up and about and running as quickly as he could. So, determination, I think.
I suppose it's easy to think that this is a very sad story, but before we started recording, you kind of said it's actually a very positive story. It's a very, inspiring in the way that he dealt with it, in the way that you've dealt with it as well as parents and as a family. But your life changed quite dramatically from that moment, because you've actually changed careers in that year, the year that he passed away. You changed careers because you wanted to carry on the fight, didn't you?
Yeah, it was really important. I didn't quite know what way or pathway I was going to go down. But it became apparent quite quickly that we had spent the last 4 years living, breathing, sleeping, talking about neuroblastoma. And so, of course, we as parents had learned, quite a lot through that time, and, been exposed to, unless you're in it, you don't see what goes on. You may not see what goes on with play therapists that are supporting children and their families. You may not see what goes on, for social workers. But having been exposed to all of that, it kind of opened our eyes to, a whole new world of empathy and care that was out there. I didn't really have a plan, actually, in all honesty. There wasn't a plan. It was just get back to work 8 weeks after Jamie's service, just get back to work because bills need to be paid. You still have to, get on with life. And then an opportunity came to, really think about, well, what can I do with everything that I've learned, from Jamie? What can I do with that? And the opportunity arose with the charity that I was still connected with. So the charity that we'd launched the campaign with back in 2009, we'd been attending their, neuroblastoma parent conferences. So we were still very much active. Although Jamie was no longer with us, we were still, really interested and helping others, So I ended up becoming like a parent link with the charity when we used to meet with parents at that time. Because we were so small, we would meet every 4 months or so. And I would then help the charity kind of coordinate that. So I was very much still involved with the charity, and an opportunity just came up. And everyone laughs when I say this, because I thought that basically the charity wanted, me to volunteer for them. Of course I would volunteer. I would and still would do anything for that charity. I believe in everything that they do. I believe in what they stand for. their values align with my values. And there's a link there that I just cannot explain with myself and the charity. So, of course, when that moment, having a conversation, talking about, oh, yeah, well, I've got some time on my hands, I can do any voluntary work. But actually, they were basically seeing if I would be interested in working with them, because at that time there were more and more families needing support. And so I snapped up the opportunity. People say, don't they, especially in that first year of bereavement, you should never make really big, life-changing decisions. But I think very differently about that. I think, well, why not? Why not? If you've had something so life-changing happen, then that changes the status quo in your family and your perception. So why not do something completely different? That was all I needed. And then in October 2013, so the same year that Jamie passed, I became a professional at the charity rather than a parent. You know, that parent experience is really, really vital, and drives the charity forward. So, so I set up, worked with amazing colleagues, and we set up the family support service. And there are 4 of us in the family support team. One of them's based, Donna, amazing, incredible lady who's based in the US and works for SKC US and SKC UK. Then I have Hayley, whose daughter is in long-term remission. So her experiences and perceptions on, what life is like after neuroblastoma is really, really important for families, to know that. And then I have another colleague called Sam, whose daughter is also doing really, really well. So that's just us and family support. But behind the scenes, the charity is just incredible. We're very parent-led. So even at board level, there are parents who have lost their child, like I have, and who have also been involved, in the charity for many, many years. So we have parents at board level, we have parents working within the charity that have lived experience. And it's incredible. It's incredible to help, or just try and help in some way, for anyone that needs it, that's going through a neuroblastoma diagnosis with their child. I often think, if only we had that. If only, why did it take a year for me to be able to meet a family properly? Now, if a family need it, we can connect them with another family that same day, if that other family were available, or they can have a call with our, professional but experienced, family support team.
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's so. I don't want to use the cliche, but it's so inspiring to hear that you went through such trauma. People would think that was an incredibly traumatic few years that you went through as a family and as a mother, to then actually carry on and stay and help other families and other mothers and fathers through the same situation or through similar situations. It's incredibly inspiring. How do you cope with do you have to relive? I mean, I know today we've talked and you've spoken so well about Jamie. You have to relive that story constantly. How does that feel? Yeah,
again, that's a really good question. Perhaps that emotional resilience. But when I talk about that, I don't want that to sound as though, that's because I'm completely detached or cold, about what happened with Jamie. Of course, the longer you're in bereavement, for any bereaved parent, when we talk about our child and what happened, it's different than if you're the person listening and you've not heard that story before. There's a few kind of deep breaths, like, oh my gosh. But for us as the bereaved parents, it's not a normal thing, but it becomes normalized because, you're living with grief. You have to let grief in, and you have to let grief work alongside you and your life. And for me, that grief is Jamie. So I've got Jamie's right by my side. And so I do tend to see and deal with these things, differently, because we're all different. But I always value any opportunity. I think I said before when we were chatting earlier that when you've had such a remarkable child, every child is remarkable. But when you see what children with cancer have to go through, it changes your perspective completely. And, to have Jamie and just how remarkable he was and is, his story is remarkable. If we don't share that story or continue to tell it, then Jamie will be forgotten. And that is my fear now. We're, as you say, 11 years into the kind of grieving, and yet Jamie is not forgotten. And that's really, really important. But, equally, that emotional resilience that you kind of put some of it to one side when you're supporting families, because it's not about you. It's about that family that are going through it today. That family right now that are receiving treatment for high-risk neuroblastoma. It's not about us as parents at the charity that have gone through it, but it's about what we do and what we can do is be that listening ear. We actively listen and we're empathetic. We completely empathize and understand, what they're going through. And there's no right or wrong way of dealing with this. We make mistakes like the glitch that we had with missing bits on eligibility. So it's a very privileged and humbled position to be in.
And like you say, Jamie's memory is very much alive. I mean, particularly with the community as well. There's still a very active Facebook page, Keep Jamie Smiling.
Yeah.
Where you post memories of Jamie and sort of milestones within his journey as well. You kind of relive that, don't you? And I've seen quite a lot of photos that have been put on there. But then also the campaigning that you continue to do. So things like it's Gym Jams for Jamie, isn't it? That you do every year.
Yeah. I mean, that...
And it's still going. People still remember it and they still want to help.
I know. And it's, each year you think, do people still want to, contribute to that? And so every year, it really does surprise me every year, because you just never know. One year it just may not be as it has been before, but actually you bring, there's a lot of new supporters as well along the way. And of course, Poppy, Jamie's sister getting older, she's got her community as well. So, there's lots of different, communities and supporters for that. So yeah, Gym Jams for Jamie just evolved really. I think probably in about 2015, I think was our first Gym Jams for Jamie. We'd done a couple of other things before that, like Pass the Parcel, where, we'd ask people to donate brand new toys to take to the oncology unit in Leeds and for the children's ward in York. But then, it just developed. Just something one day, I just thought this is what we'll do. And so Gym Jams for Jamie brings, and gifts brand new pyjamas to children at Christmas in hospital in the North Yorkshire area.
It's just testament, really, I think, to the people, not just the people of York. I'm sure there's people that you're still connected with in Germany and in America who are still very much part of helping and sort of spreading the word and keeping Jamie's memory alive. But it is sort of testament, I think, to other people and how people come together and humanity, isn't it? That Jamie's memory is still alive and these things carry on.
Yeah, the fact that people, want to do things and be involved and help it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah. I want to ask a little bit about the treatment. Obviously, it's like we said, it's 11 years.
Yeah.
Actually, how many years is it since Jamie was first diagnosed?
So 2009 he was diagnosed. Yeah.
What have the advancements been? How has the landscape changed for children with cancer in that time? What are we seeing now that might be different?
I mean, clearly I can really only talk to neuroblastoma,
Yeah.
but in terms of, childhood cancer, because each cancer type is different, so there are different advances, some that may be quicker than others. But the problem has been with neuroblastoma, especially high-risk neuroblastoma, it's classed as a rare disease. So approximately 100 children a year are diagnosed. That's not rare to the parent who hears those words, is it? So advancements have been possibly not as quick as people would like it to be, but that's also because of the numbers. You need to have clinical trials that are statistically valid. You need, to bring those trials into, frontline treatment. Obviously, they've got to go through that whole clinical trial process, but it takes a long time. It really does take a long time. And so that's part of the work at Solving Kids Cancer with our research strategy is, how to accelerate those clinical trials for paediatric cancer. How can we bring clinical trials closer to home that are showing the most promise, but yet they're just out of reach, and it means that it's not readily available. So there's lots of work going on there. But in terms of the advancements, like I said before with the immunotherapy, that was the big development really for high-risk neuroblastoma. So to bring that into the children's frontline treatment as standard of care has been the biggest change in my time. But equally, there are advancements being made within that frontline protocol. There are also advancements being made in terms of a cohort of children for whom their disease just may not respond. So it might be super stubborn. Everything that's being thrown at it isn't, the cancer isn't responding. And that's called refractory disease. Of course, we also have the children who are relapsing. So for relapse and refractory, which was where we found ourselves in that relapse position with not a lot to go to. And there are, Solving Kids Cancer are co-funders as well of a particular trial in Southampton called Minivan, and that is for children with relapse refractory disease. So things like that just were not available back then are offering more hope for the children today, because that's what's needed. Those parents need to see that hope in their clinicians' eyes. They need to see that hope in the treatment that's being administered. They need that hope to keep them going through this.
What would your message be to parents who perhaps receive the news that their child has neuroblastoma?
It just completely depends on that parent. And I would say maybe don't Google straight away. But everything is so instantaneous nowadays. Maybe just take the time you need to understand what's happening and be really truthful to the people around you, because people want to help, but then they don't quite know how to help. And then, especially in those early days of diagnosis, you feel like you're having to update everybody at different points and it becomes exhausting. So perhaps, lean on another family member or good friend that could be a spokesperson, because naturally your family will be worrying about what's happening. But then that takes a lot of time and energy. So I think just taking the time to understand what's happening and make sure that there's somebody else there that could be, your go-to and your spokesperson, just so that you can just focus solely, because it's a busy time as well as the shock and the anxiety. It's really busy in those first few weeks of diagnosis, and you're having to manage, your home, your hospital life, so it can become quite consuming. And then when ready, connect with those other parents. Look at those parents who are maybe 3 or 4 months into treatment, or look at, connecting with parents who have got through it, because it's really hard to see that hope in the beginning. But as soon as you have that, then it changes the way you deal with that journey.
Thank you to Vicky Inglis for sharing Jamie's story. For more information about the charity, head to solvingkidscancer.org.uk. Also be sure to check out the work of Martin House Children's Hospice, which is based in Boston Spa. That's martinhouse.org.uk. And you can continue to follow Vicky's work and the Christmas appeals, including Jim Jams for Jamie, on the Facebook group Keep Jamie Smiling.